Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Spokane Community College. My name is Kevin Brockbank. I'm the president here, and we are here today in order to host the next installment of the Town Hall series with the CCS Chancellor. And before we get started with introductions, I'm going to actually read our CCS Native Land Acknowledgement Statement. We are honored to acknowledge that the community colleges of Spokane and our main campuses for Spokane Falls and Spokane Community College are located on the traditional and sacred homelands of the Spokane tribe. We also provide services in a region that includes the traditional and sacred homelands of the confederated tribes of the Colville Reservation, Kalispel Tribe, Nez Perce, and Coeur d'Alene tribes. We pay our respect to tribal elders, both past and present, as well as to all indigenous people today. This land holds our cultural DNA, and we are honored and grateful to be here on their traditional lands. We give thanks to the legacy of the original people and their descendants, and pledge to honor their stewardship and values. All right, so with that, I want to mention that the original intent of these town hall series were developed by our former chancellor, Dr. Christine Johnson, in response to some surveys as part of our strategic plan, as a way to have more open communication with the chancellor on a regular basis. But today, Dr. Christine Johnson is retired, and so I'm going to have the honor to introduce our acting chancellor, Greg Stevens. So I'm going to read his bio to you. So Community Colleges of Spokane, acting chancellor Greg Stevens is charged with leading a complex district that spans 6 counties over a 12,300 square mile area. The district includes Spokane Falls Community College and Spokane Community College, as well as rural learning centers, Head Start, early learning centers, and more than 2,300 employees. Stevens was appointed Vice Chancellor of Human Resources in 2000 and has held a variety of increasingly responsible executive positions within CCS, including overseeing facilities management starting in 2007, becoming Chief Administration Officer in 2010, serving as Acting Chief Financial Officer in 2011 and 12, before assuming responsibility for security and emergency management in July of 2013. Stevens has held a variety of leadership roles with the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges system. He helped to form the Washington chapter of College and University Professional Association for Human Resources and served as its initial president. He was recognized as one of Boise State University's distinguished alumni in 2010, and he holds professional certifications in project management, mediation leadership, development, facilitation, and systems thinking. Prior to joining CCS in 2000, Stevens' career included executive and administrative roles in Butte Glen Community College and the county of Tuolumne, both in California, as well as professional HR positions in healthcare with Fortune 500 companies in the public sector. He has also served on several professional boards over the years. And I'll tell you also, the thing that's not included in Greg's bio, and as many of us in executive leadership know, Greg also serves as the person with all the answers, all the history, and the person you go to when the problem is really kind of too hard to solve. He is a very pragmatic leader that helps us move things forward behind the scenes and is really a true asset to our district. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Carolyn Casey for some questions. Or is Greg going to do an introduction? Oh, there you go.
Good afternoon. As Kevin mentioned, I've been here forever. I showed up in April of 2000, and this April will complete my 23rd year at the Community Colleges of Spokane. Initially as Vice Chancellor of HR, and then as my career kind of went along, additional responsibilities were added. Truth be known, I had the fortune of working with leaders who could recognize when I was getting restless and would give me new challenges to take on. And that kept me both engaged and thrilled to be here. And over time, particularly where your kids grow up, becomes home. And so it became a hard thing to ever consider to leave home. And at this point in my career, glad that never happened. So what am I doing here? It's a good question. We had plenty of advance notice that Dr. Johnson was considering retirement. She had let the board know in time for us to actually have conducted a spring search last spring. And we got that started, and then for various reasons, it became inappropriate to move forward with that search. Dr. Johnson didn't change her retirement date. It was always going to be December 31st of 22, and she followed through with that. And that alerted the board that there was going to be a period of time where we needed somebody to serve in an acting capacity from January 1st until either June 30th of this year or until a new chancellor is appointed, whichever occurs first. They asked, and I was honored to serve in that role. And that's kind of what brings me here today. As far as what I'm hoping to get accomplished in that brief period of time, it's pretty focused. And as was recently announced on the inside, I really have three things that I'm focused on. One is to keep the momentum going on things that we have in progress. We have some important initiatives that are underway that we really can't afford to put on the shelf and wait for the new chancellor to pick them up coming in July. What are those things? The strategic plan is important. We're at the midway point, and we want to continue to make progress on that plan. Things like guided pathways, the CRM, transforming our telephone system from analog to digital. Those are initiatives that we need to continue to push forward. Having said that, the hope is also not to start anything new, right? Sometimes crisis or a golden opportunity fall into your lap and you have to deal with them. But minus that, I think it's the new chancellor's prerogative to set our priorities and to figure out what we should be working on going forward. So, not a promise, but a hope that we don't have to start anything new between now and July 1st. Second goal is to find a new chancellor. When the board asked me to serve, I made it clear to them that I did not want to be considered and I would not be applying for this position. That gave me the ability to continue to support the search, which was a responsibility we've had in my office for 22 years. But it also allowed us to communicate with potential candidates that this was an open competitive recruitment and that they should apply knowing that. And then the third goal was to make sure that that new chancellor is successful. That first year of onboarding, orientation, introduction to the community and key stakeholders is critical. I've put a task force together to build that plan. It's being led by Provost Lori Hunt. And we hope when the chancellor gets here that we'll be able to get that plan operationalized and help them in their first year be successful. And then the other thing is the easiest thing, and that's to stay out of the way. The magic that happens in our classrooms and in our student service offices and then back offices is magic, and it just needs to continue. And the worst thing I could do is try to create any barriers to that happening. And the next easiest thing to do is to just let an outstanding group of executives do their job. We have 2 exceptional presidents. They're supported by excellent administrators and deans. We have excellent management services officers, and I'm very comfortable just letting them do their job, knowing that they've been successful and will continue to be successful. So with that brief background, I think I'll walk back over there and we can take some questions.
Great, thank you very much. So this is going to be everyone's opportunity to ask Greg questions, and for those of you who are watching online, you just need to type the question into the chat and we'll make sure that Greg gets asked that question, and everybody in the audience is welcome to ask questions as well. We've got runners with microphones. That's the only thing I ask, is we've got Erin down there with a microphone so she can make sure that everybody in the online audience can also hear this. I'm Carolyn Casey, the district's Chief Institutional Advancement Officer. So I'm going to pause for a moment and see if anybody has an immediate question that they would like to ask Greg. Okay, if you change your mind at any moment, raise your hand and we will ask your question. So Greg, I'm curious if you could share with the group, what do you consider your leadership style and strengths?
Well, I don't know. Maybe at the end of my career, I'll sit down and try to document what it is. I've had the benefit of working with some really excellent leaders, in my opinion. Have had those experiences, had opportunities to learn from other leaders, both in watching how they operated and reading about them. And I think it's maybe a bit of servant leadership. I don't think you can survive in higher education if that isn't a part of your style. At least you can't have a long career in higher education unless that's how you focus your decision making. And for us, right, we serve students, and so that's an easy thing for us to comprehend and get behind. And then I think situational leadership, there's some of that in there. like meeting people where they're at and helping them kind of get to that next spot. The things that a new employee needs from their leadership are different from the things that tenured employees need from their leadership. And so finding out what their needs are and then providing what's needed, I think, are critical. Probably my leadership style is kind of summed up in the bumper stickers that people that report directly to me hear from me a lot. It's things like plan the work and work the plan, stay in your lane, look for the twofers as far as efficiency goes, be hard on the principles but soft on the people. My folks hear that from me a lot. You'll see it in a lot of the offices, for example, hanging up on the wall. We try to both enforce it and live that.
Great, thank you. So many people here worked with Dr. Johnson for quite a few years and understood sort of her decision-making style. What would you like people to know about what you need when you're gearing up to make a decision?
I think it probably depends on whether I've got time or whether it's a crisis, right? Because there's a different approach when you have the benefit of time. I'm a big believer in being data informed, and that's different from letting data make your decision. But I think if you're not paying attention to the trends and the longitudinal types of things that are happening, you're not going to make a good decision. So being considerate of that is really important. I think being future focused, decisions should incorporate how does this help us get to where we need to go next. That should always be part of the decision as well. Values driven, are the things we're deciding consistent with the things we say we're about, right? And then making the decision and communicating it is critical as well, so everybody knows what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the hoped for outcome is. Now, if we don't have time, which more and more seems to be the case, sometimes you just have to trust your experience and go with your gut a little bit. A good example of that is COVID. When we were all sent home in March of 2020, Dr. Johnson was away. And so I was acting in her behalf. And it became important to just kind of go by feel a little bit. But I also recall that 15 years prior to that, we were dealing with something called the bird flu. Remember the bird flu? It never actually showed up, but we were all quite frightened that it might. And we had at that time put together a pandemic plan that was specifically focused on that particular pandemic. But I found if you took bird flu out and inserted COVID, it was a good enough operational plan that we could work from it. And it got us by. When a lot of colleges were kind of floundering, trying to figure out what to do, we were making decisions and moving forward. And then I think it's important to be confident but not stubborn. You have to act. When there's something on fire, you've got to respond. You haven't got time to form a task force and do a lot of data analysis. You have to act. And you need to act confidently, but I think you can't be so stubborn as to recognize when a decision isn't turning out the way you hoped for and be able to back up, redirect, realign, and push off maybe in another direction. So I think that's the answer.
I'm just going to look at all of you again to see if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask Greg. And pardon me? We have one from online. Oh, great. I don't know that your mic is on.
We have one from online.
There we go. Okay.
Katie says, CCS has created a land acknowledgement. What action steps do you have in mind to move us beyond just words to actually foster stewardship in the community and restitution with local tribes?
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are some initiatives underway that I kind of inherited, and then we've had some conversation of how we expand on those efforts. So the state board had actually initiated in November. I'm looking over at Kevin, Kimberly. I think that's when we were over at Big Bend. They initiated what they called a government-to-government conversation where the Eastern Washington region tribes and community college leaders got together to just talk about how we could establish and further working relationships that would serve those tribes and also help the community colleges better serve the nations that we work with in our specific areas. We've also had individual communications with some of the tribes, for example, the Colville Confederated Nation, where we're starting to reach out, have conversations. In fact, I believe both presidents are going to be attending one of those meetings in the next week. So we have some of those relationship building initiatives underway, and I've kept them underway. I think the thing that we all acknowledge is that building an effective relationship with the tribal nations really is about relationships. That's the key part of that effort. And we can't just show up with answers. We've got to show up and listen to the questions and listen to the needs and then engage on what the possible answers or the best answers are. And I think when we show up thinking we know everything, we are appropriately shown to the door. And we need to be more engaged with trying to figure out what's needed before we show up with an answer.
Great, thank you. So something I've heard people ask kind of in the hallway chat about the transition going on right now is who's doing Greg Stevens' old job right now, and is there going to be somebody is there an acting Greg Stevens, or how is all that working? So,
yeah, the answer is Greg Stevens is going to be doing that job. I'm doing both, but the law of physics doesn't really allow that to be possible. So I'm doing both with a whole lot of help. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So a big part of Dr. Johnson's job, her role was advocacy work, working with the legislators from our region. And I don't have interest in doing that kind of work, but we have two excellent presidents who appeared to have interest, and not only had interest, but are really good at that job. And so I've agreed to just turn them loose, and they did wonderful. I was with them over in Olympia last week, in fact, and got to watch them in operation. And they are tireless and exceptional advocates for our system and for our district and for their colleges. So that's helped. My direct reports in the Administrative Services Division are working with a lot less access to me, but I have high confidence in the decision-making of people like John Gillette, Melody Matthews, Ken DeMello, Charlie Holland, Tim Fackenthal. They can make good decisions, and they have the benefit of knowing kind of what the guidelines are, what the boundaries are from me, from the work that we've done in team development. So I can trust that they're going to operate within those boundaries and come check with me anytime they feel like they're getting close to the guidelines and get realigned. So that's how we're doing it. And then I'll be honest, a lot of stuff is kind of on delay or on hold.
okay. So no acting Greg Stevens. I know a lot of folks are thinking quite a bit about the transition to the new chancellor and how that's going to work. And you've gone through this before at CCS. What are going to be the ways for employees across CCS to give feedback on the finalists, and how will that work, and who will actually look at that feedback? Can you talk about that?
I can, yeah, and we do have experience with that. We've got a pretty established system, I think, that works well. Just historically, we had worked with a group called ACCT when I got here 23 years ago. And we had a series of openings as chance or circumstance would dictate for presidents and for a chancellor. And we noticed that we kept seeing the same 5 people over and over and over again. And these were people that ACCT was bringing to us as prepared candidates that they thought we should consider. The problem was they weren't recognizing that they were bringing us the same people that we had rejected the time before. And so our board at the time was pretty astute, and they observed this, and they came to me and said, do you think you could build an executive recruitment function? And I said, yeah, we could do that, easy enough. And they said, do you think you could build it and recruit a chancellor at the same time? So we were literally kind of laying the track as we were driving on it. But if you remember, that process ended in Gary Livingston, who is one of our really fine chancellors in our district and did great work for us. And it worked. And there were a couple of tenets that we really adhered to as we built that process. One was how critical it was that we maintain confidentiality of the applicants. We needed to give them assurances every single time they applied that their application would not be known until we got to the end and we could no longer protect their identity. And we've adhered to that. And that really is the work of our committee members who took that serious as a part of the charge and made sure that they maintained confidence. And so we have in our system an excellent reputation in that regard. If you apply with Spokane, it's not going to follow you back home. It's not going to be a disadvantage in your current job. I mentioned that as related to our current search, and that sometimes it feels like there's secrecy. And the reality is there's confidentiality, and they're different. We're not being secret about the fact that we have accepted applications, that we have screened them, that we now have semifinalist interviews scheduled, and that those will occur in February 16th and 17th. And that ideally we'll meet the charge of the board and turn over top candidates the week of March 6th. And that you'll have opportunities to come and meet those candidates. And at that point, you'll know who they are, you'll know their bios, and you'll be able to come prepared to those open forums and both listen to them and also ask them questions. And to leave the board, who will make the final decision, to leave them input using a forum feedback process. We're actually playing with a pending best practice that SFCC has developed where we move those forum feedback forms into an online survey. We're exploring that as one of the options for you to provide feedback. And we may also incorporate that with our hard copy forms as we transition to an all online system in the future. So those will be your opportunities to both engage with the process, meet the candidates, and leave feedback for the board.
So you mentioned, possibly a new process with the online form. What can you say to people about the confidentiality of the feedback they provide in that system?
Well, where to start? So I'll go to the hard copy form feedback forms. You'll remember if you've used those, there's no place for you to, or there's no requirement for you to put your name on it. And other than how easy it is to identify you with your handwriting, there really is no way for us to identify who submits those forms. They're actually all gathered up by the constituency group that's inserted them. So all faculty are kind of put together in one section and all exempt are put together in one section. But otherwise, there's no organization to that feedback. Online, other than, I guess technically there's some way to connect you with what you submit, but I can tell you we really don't have the time or probably the expertise to do that, or the interest, frankly. We want your input. We don't want to affix that input to you necessarily. We just need you as an employee to tell us what you're thinking.
And I hear we've got an online question for Jeff to share.
Yes, we have a couple of them. The first one is from Stacy, which says, what conversations have happened or are happening around the current and ongoing crisis in staffing in regards to recruitment and retaining employees, especially in regards to entry-level positions?
Yeah, that is close to problem number one, next to enrollment. I think our both recruitment and retention and our ability to compete in what is the hottest job market I've ever seen in my career. So what are we doing? Well, we're keeping an eye on our benefit package and making sure that we maintain competitiveness there. With salaries, we're somewhat locked in because we're a state agency and we're tied to for classified staff particularly, we're tied to a state salary schedule. It isn't a local schedule. And so we're somewhat restricted to what is available through the state salary schedule system. We've been advocating as a leadership group, along with the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, that compensation is a priority for our system, that they need to not only fund at the level the governor has proposed, which isn't 100%, but to fund completely at 100% the compensation increases that are on the table. Those increases are for classified staff a 4% general salary increase scheduled for July 1st of this year, and a 3% increase scheduled for July 1st of 2024. For the most part, experience tells me that will be what's budgeted for our exempt staff as well. And then faculty are actually tied by a state initiative called 732 to the Consumer Price Index in Seattle. We don't know what that is yet, but what they're predicting is somewhere around an 8% to 9% increase for July 1st. For our faculty, actually, it's September 1st when they come back for next academic year, and a 4.9 for the following fiscal year. So that's what's on the table. It's not enough. We'd actually been advocated for an additional 6% of just retention money, what we thought it would take to create competitive salary schedules, but the governor did not support that. We continue to advocate for that with the Senate and the House, and we'll see what comes of it.
Just following up on that, do you want to say anything about some of the improvements that are happening to the recruitment process?
Yeah, we've been really mindful that we're too slow. We and I'm sure you have lots of examples where as our process has unfolded, a lot of the best candidates have been snapped up by other employers, who, particularly in the private sector, who can move quick. And so we have revisited our recruitment processes. We did that over a year ago when Grace Leaf was the HR director, and she found ways to knock quite a bit of time out of the process. Melody Matthews also developed the PROS online form that allows us to approve a position for recruitment really in a matter of hours if everybody's at their computer, where it used to take weeks to even get a recruitment underway. So those operational systems things have helped us speed things up. We've also, through the strategic plan, have authorized a project that's under the project management of Brandon Livingston, who's looking at further leaning of the recruitment process, trying to find those two-for opportunities where we could be doing multiple things at the same time and speed things up, and also just to identify the wasted efforts that are occurring in our process and to eliminate those. My last check-in with Brandon was he was at about 50% complete on that project. I think his timeline was to have something ready by spring semester or spring quarter. So we're looking forward to what comes from that process as well.
Thank you, and I understand you got one more online question?
That's correct. Francisco asks, currently CCS does not have a dedicated anonymous bias incident reporting system. What models for bias incident reporting have you seen at other institutions that have worked well in your opinion?
Well, I think the processes we do have in place are more geared towards harassment discrimination as it's defined in the law and under regulatory statutes. So it doesn't allow us those early opportunities for early resolution, mediation, and I think those processes are always things that we're cognizant of, and we, from a consulting approach, are trying to implement those steps short of a formal complaint. We found with formal complaints often we're in the gears of the process at that point, and we miss those opportunities to try to find understanding and learning at the earliest stages where folks perhaps aren't as dug into positions. So those are a couple of things that jump to mind. We're always reviewing those processes to try to make them more effective, and we have great people now in some of those positions like Francisco who can help us in that regard.
Great, thank you. And I'm looking at our in-person audience to see if there's anybody who has any questions. You're very shy, you're very quiet. There we go, okay. And Aaron, would you bring a microphone over, please?
Excuse me. I was just wondering, for the transition for the new chancellor, how hands-on you plan on being with helping to train that person and get them adjusted into their role, and when you plan on kind of stepping out more.
Yeah, I've given that some thought. I think I owe my wife an apology vacation, probably. And after that's over, I think I can help, but I don't want to also get in the way. I think I was thinking about how best for a person new to our system to learn about us. And it occurred to me that to see our values in operation, you just need to get on the college campuses and wander around. And so I think that's a piece of my advice to a new chancellor is just go wander around. Guided or just on your own, you're going to see our culture and our values are acted out every hour of every day. And it's pretty easy to identify who we are and what we're about. I made mention earlier that we have formed a task force that's just looking at onboarding of the new chancellor. So they're developing a 30, 60, 90, 6-month and 1 year kind of milestone program that makes sure that at the right time, at the critical points, we're making the right introductions and engaging with the right processes so that they know they're working on the right thing at the right time. I think the hardest thing when you're new is just what are you missing? That's what keeps you up at night. What do you not know? And so I think our effort is to make sure that they know, that they're informed, and that we're helping them make those decisions in the first year so that experience, that learning curve happens effectively. And then, yeah, I've been fortunate to be accessible to the last couple of chancellors, been able to work very closely with them, so I can certainly relay my observations from 2 very successful chancellors and what I saw that made them successful. Certainly not as any kind of, you must do's. I'm not in that position, but certainly as an encouragement to here's one way to be successful in this job.
Great. Anybody else in the audience? Yes, Aaron, would you?
Sorry to make you.
Hang on for just 1 second. There we go.
Thank you. Hi, Greg. I have a question. I'm currently serving as one of as the faculty tri-chair for the Diversity, Equity, and Global Awareness Committee at SFCC. So I've 2 things we were curious about. One, could you say a bit to us about your personal approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of the CCS community? And then if you also have some thoughts to share about ways that we as a CCS community can go above and beyond the requirements of, say, like the recent legislation that passed. Like, what can we do as a CCS community to improve student retention, to recruit students, to help onboard them with an eye toward diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Great, yeah. So I'll try to get them both. If I miss one, redirect, please. So personally, I'll be honest, I am a farm and ranch kid from southern Idaho in very small communities. Diversity wasn't a part of my upbringing. I wasn't exposed to it. I didn't have those kind of interactions on which to establish both experience and values. And so for me, believe it or not, it was through sports where I first had opportunity to meet and learn from those that were from traditionally underutilized populations. That certainly was helpful. My career has also afforded me opportunity to continue to learn and to experience and to develop. In my roles in HR in particular, I was often either a part of or chairing committees and councils that were focused on those types of programs and services. But I'll be honest with you, I've always considered myself a student in this regard. I recognized early I had a lot to learn to be able to understand. I ask a lot of questions, and I observe a lot. I have a person in my HR office that I've worked with for a very long time that is from a minority population. Some of the best conversations I have in terms of learning occurs in just kind of debriefing with him, particularly on the events that have occurred in the last 3 years. So those have been very meaningful to me. But I'm always learning, and I think I always will learn. And I hope the fact that I'm open to learning and that I'm always trying to understand is important to those that are around me. So in terms of student retention and recruitment, particularly from those underrepresented populations, I think recruitment and retention of every student is critical right now. Perhaps we'll get to talk about enrollment and kind of where we're at and where we think we might be going. But we can't afford to not serve anyone who wants services from us. And we also, I think, need to provide, and it gets back to that situational leadership, we need to provide what's needed when it's needed and understand that those populations need different services from us and need maybe more services from us at critical times in their educational pursuits. And we have to be prepared, one, to understand that, and then two, have programs developed that help deliver the services at the right time. And the goal for every student, but particularly for those that aren't sure if they belong here yet, is to make sure that they feel welcome and make sure that it's a comfortable environment for them, both experience-wise and educational-wise. So, yeah.
Great. You mentioned enrollment and wondering if we were going to talk about enrollment today. So how are we doing with enrollment, and what do you see the future holding for CCS with enrollment?
Well, I think it's important for everybody to understand, and it gets back to that data-informed trend, longitudinal stuff that I like, that we're at the end of a decade of declining enrollments. It was a gradual decline that was accelerated greatly during COVID, but we have declined 41% from 2011 through 2021. That is significant, right? And sometimes we're forced by our state system to look at our enrollments as compared to last year, but I think we miss the opportunity to really put that in context when we consider what's happened over a longer period of time. I don't see a student population coming to us that's going to fix that problem by itself. We know that high school populations after 2025 are going to flatline and then decline fairly steadily through 2035. So K-12 graduations aren't the answer to our concerns around enrollment. We also know that the job market is going to stay hot. The reality is, just demographically, we don't have enough workers for the number of jobs that we have. And without a significant change in our immigration policies in this country, we will continue to have vacancies. I think where community colleges fit in there is there are also unemployed, smaller and smaller group, but often unemployment is a skill set issue. If we can get those people the right skills, there are jobs waiting for them that are going unfilled right now, and we could be part of the solution in that regard. So the hot job market, but also we live in a state with the highest minimum wage in the nation. So our prospective students are making decisions to go into the job market, unskilled jobs, but jobs that pay fairly well from what they might have expected 2, 3, 4 years ago. So with all that in combination, I think we will continue to have to be smart about enrollment. And I love what our colleges are doing. I mentioned that 41% decline. This year, it seems to be moving in a positive direction. So I think we've maybe found the floor, and now we're going to find where the new normal is at. I don't think it's where we're at today, but in the near future, we'll know what normal looks like for the near future. And my expectation is it'll continue to be negative as compared to a decade ago, but hopefully at a number that works for us and works for our communities. And I think the other thing I love that the colleges are doing is putting the focus on retention. I think that growth that happened this year, as I understand it, is less per se to do with new students and more to do with retaining the students that we have. We're seeing better retention from those key milestones at 15 credits, 30 credits, 45 credits. I think guided pathways is a big part of that. Showing them where their path is at, how to successfully get there, and then guiding them along the way, I think is critical to keeping a student engaged and stopping that loss that occurs at those critical milestones. So, enrollment is a challenge. It's going to continue to be a challenge. I think we're putting our focus in the right areas to make a difference, and we'll see what the new normal is here in the next year or two.
So you mentioned enrollment. Soon we'll have finalists for Chancellor talking to you and talking to lots of people about what are the biggest challenges and opportunities that they'll face at CCS. Other than enrollment, what would you answer them about that?
Well, we talked about recruitment and retention. That's certainly an issue that requires ongoing focus. I think the third is the changing environment in which our colleges are operating. And there's both a physical change and then there's just kind of an expectation change. On the physical change, our neighborhoods have changed really dramatically in the last 5 years. For SCC, really in the last year. I remember SFCC, if you look at it from a map, it kind of sits on a peninsula. It's surrounded by the river, which forms a large peninsula of land that SFCC sits on. And that used to give it a very isolated rural feel. If you go over there now, if it was your first trip in the last 4 or 5 years, you'd notice a dramatic difference. A neighborhood that's sprung up around it, a neighborhood that has a lot of transitional population in it, that attracts not the best element, who are finding their way on our campuses. And I know a lot of this because I oversee security, and I know the work that our security officers are doing now compared to what they were doing 3 years ago, and it's dramatically different. At SCC, we have a homeless shelter that opened within a half mile of the campus, and the campus also, unfortunately, happens to be on the migration way toward the Centennial Trail, which gets people downtown. And we anticipated that that was going to increase non-student people navigating the campus, and perhaps with that, acts of vandalism or crime. And that's turned out to be true. I was speaking with Charlie Holland yesterday. He said the reportable incidents last year were 98 at this time, and this year we're at 194 reported incidents. So more than doubling the interactions that security has and feels a need to document because they feel like either a crime has occurred or may occur. So it's really changed, I think, the things that the colleges, in addition to serving students and being a contributor to our communities, are now having to deal with things that are really more things that we used to think only Seattle had to deal with. Yeah, so that's one challenge I think that we're going to need help with, and guidance and leadership and interaction with our local law enforcement, our local councils and mayors to try to help us deal with. And yeah, so that's the physical change. I think just the environmental change that I'm noting is we're getting students now who are much higher touch, that need additional services that we haven't previously had to worry about. Food insecurity, housing insecurity, domestic violence, mental health are things that are greater demands on our college staff than they have been in the past. And that's changing our model a little bit to not only be focused on education, but now also be a somewhat social service type of an agency. And I think we need to not just let that happen, but to be thoughtful about it from a strategic standpoint, and either accept that role, decline the role, and if we accept it, we need to be thoughtful about how we provide those programs. Because certainly one of the things that's true of everyone I work with is the kind heart that they have. That's what attracts people to education, particularly community college education. And we had an interaction just yesterday. It was really cold outside, and there was obviously a homeless person from the center who'd gotten onto campus, was wrapped up in a blanket, and this person wanted to bring them inside and get them coffee and get them warmed up. And the conversation was, yeah, that's the right thing to do, but also, do you understand what happens after that? And that you may have a line formed tomorrow of where free coffee can be had and where you can get in out of the cold. And that's okay if that's part of our mission. It's not okay if it isn't, because it distracts from our current mission, which is serving students. So we need some leadership in that regard to walk through the conversations, to make thoughtful decisions, and then put the programming in place that supports all that.
Great, thank you. Do we have any new online questions or questions from the audience? Okay, so you mentioned that tremendous decline in enrollment over the years, and given that, it makes me wonder, how is it that we can afford to keep the lights on, and is CCS going to be running out of money soon, or how does that work? We've heard some of the community colleges in the state are having really big financial problems. Where is CCS in that?
It is true that some of our peers are in bad shape. But I'll be honest, they've gotten in bad shape through bad decision-making, in my observation. We've had excellent stewards of our resources at the community colleges of Spokane, and I'm including everybody in the audience and online. You're mindful of the resources we're given, and you use them in a smart way, and a thrifty way. The budget is complicated. My 1 year as CFO proved to me that the budget is a complicated process. There's lots of revenue streams coming in and lots of stuff going out. And it helped me to kind of put it in terms that I could wrap my head around, and that's that we have a checking account and we have a savings account. Our checking account is our operational budget. It's the money that comes from the state to operate this year, and we can be reasonably assured that next year we'll get the same. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more, but that our basic operations are covered that way, and that includes things like salaries and benefits and utility bills and the things that you pay monthly for. And our savings account are our reserves, the money that's one time, either because we didn't spend it or because we accrued it in a one-time way. And you don't use that for your ongoing expenses. You don't pay your cable bill out of your savings account, right? The colleges on the other side of the state that are struggling are paying their cable bill out of their savings account and have been for a long time, and it's gotten them in trouble. We haven't done that here. So we actually have a fairly healthy savings account, appropriately so. The board has directed us by policy to put enough operational reserve away that we could cover, is it 3 months, Lisa, or 6 months? 6 months of your salary and benefits and the utility bills, should the state just decide not to pay them, decide not to send us our money, we could still operate for 6 months. We have enough money set away that we could do that. We also could pay 3 months of utility bills, should the money go away. We could pay rents for 6 months if we needed to, because we've established those reserves. If we have a really important piece of our infrastructure crash, we have the reserves set up to fix that. And that becomes important like a day like today when the heating system might go out. We can get on that, and we wouldn't have to wait for a state allocation to fix it. So we've been smart in that regard. Our checking account, at least this budget year, looks like it's going to be okay. There's not any proposals for any dramatic cuts. The one we're most concerned about is not fully funding compensation, which could impact us to the tune of $1.5 million that we would have to come up with. But we're working that problem, and we're hopeful from what we're hearing from the legislature that we can either greatly reduce or solve that problem. So that's kind of where we're at. We're in good shape, not great shape. There isn't money kind of falling out of our pockets that we could spend on silly things, but good shape, financially sound. The things you'll hear about your peer colleges, rest assured, that isn't us.
So it seems like when you're talking about our reserves and things, maybe we shouldn't tell the federal government because they're not having as good a time as we are. So speaking of the federal government, we got a lot of money from them during COVID, lots of federal aid, and we used it for many different things. It helped us over the huge bumps of COVID, and I believe they're not sending anymore. So
That's
is
a
the
rumor.
federal money all gone, and is that
No.
going to be a problem for us?
No, I don't think so. Again, the colleges that are struggling were using that money for ongoing expenses. They were paying their cable bill with that money. Here we made what I believe are really smart decisions with that funding. So some of it's been spent, and it's been spent appropriately. First, to cover costs while we tried to figure out what was going on, right? That was the initial allocation of the COVID money, was just, COVID caused a crash in our enrollment. That money was there to backfill until we found what the new enrollment was, and so we used it that way. We pivoted really quickly to online learning and telecommuting. And as you might guess, that took some investment in terms of infrastructure, technology, training, and we used the money for that. Also, as you might guess, John had a lot of work to do and his crews in sanitizing our workspaces and our learning spaces, moving to filters that help block any kind of contaminant that might be moving through our HVAC system, and we used the money to cover those costs. And we have a little left, and I think as leadership, we've set it aside in case there's a relapse, if there's any kind of a return to COVID status, that we've got the ability to respond again if we need to. Knock on wood, if that doesn't happen, then we'll be making decisions in the near future about how best to invest that for student success. But we were smart in how we used it, in my observation, including having a little left in case it's needed in the near future.
Great, thank you. So as you're talking about COVID, you mentioned all the sanitation things that had to happen and the pivot to online. It seems like the amount of online learning is still far exceeding what it was before COVID. And all the employees or most of the employees went home during COVID and worked from home, but we still have some employees now in this kind of strange new normal time that are partly hybrid, partly in the office. Do you see things ever going back to what was the pre-pandemic normal, or what do you think for CCS?
Yeah, great question. I don't. I think a lot of the changes that occurred are with us going forward. I'll go to online learning. I think two things happened when we were forced to move in that direction. Our faculty found that they could do it and could do it well, and our students learned that they could learn and they could do that well. And that added flexibility and adaptability to meet students where they're at and best serve them, I think is just an added arrow in our quiver. It gives us the ability to be better in delivering education to students in a way that they need it. So that was a good outcome, and I think that's with us to stay. I don't know the current percentage, but I had the feeling that, at one point we were almost 100% online because we had to be. And prior to going into COVID, I think we were about 40% online, 60% on site. And that's somewhat flipped a little bit and maybe is more of a 50-50 proposition now. So, that's still developing, but certainly we're good at it. And I think there will be continued demand for it in the future. From work standpoint, I think telecommuting is the new benefit. I think employers are starting to use it as they advertise their positions, that's one of the options, and that more and more employees are demanding it, have an expectation that's part of a flexible work environment. And so for us, I think we need to keep thoughtful, smart telecommuting policies in place, but also add other things that help with work-life balance, like flexible work scheduling, so that employees have the ability to kind of arrange work in a way that best works for their life. And that'll be ongoing expectation as well. But I say smart in that there are occupations that don't lend themselves to remote work, and I think you physically need to be there to serve students in some capacity. You need to physically be there to consult with managers and employees. And so there are smart applications of telecommuting, and there are other areas where I think it needs to be the exception and not the rule. And we're still, to be honest, kind of finding our way there.
So I don't know about the rest of you, but I used to look kind of happily at the weather forecast when there was going to be a giant snowstorm, like the type that the plows can't possibly keep up with, in the hopes that maybe Dr. Johnson would say that there wasn't going to be any work or school the next day. It feels like, and then of course I would play outside. I've got saucers and sleds in my garage, and so I would look forward to those days. It feels to me like a little bit of the joy of a snow day may have gone away. Are snow days part of our history now?
No, and we've had examples just as recently as, a couple of months ago where there's still need for safety purposes for both our students and our employees to not have them on the roads driving to work. What's different now versus 5 years ago is the comfort level we have with pivoting to online, both for learning and in the short term, right? Even an on-ground class now can easily pivot and provide some online types of educational opportunities for a day or two or a week. But also working. I think if you've got your laptop with you, it's pretty easy to just kind of transition to working from a home desk. In fact, a lot of us, I know I'm one of them, never really dismantled the COVID work site I had put together, and it's pretty convenient to just kind of dust it off and use it. So we'll still have snow. We'll still have, for safety reasons, snow days where we don't want you on campus. But I think we're a heck of a lot more functional these days than we used to be in continuing to provide service.
Darn it. So just as we transition toward the end of our town hall, I want to ask again if there's anybody out in the audience who would like to ask a question of Greg. All right, but if you all gather around him afterwards and ask him a bunch of questions, I'll be watching. So Greg, if you had to use just one word to describe CCS, what word would you choose?
Student-focused. That one's an easy one. There isn't anybody I engage with here, and I don't care what task you're performing, that doesn't understand that we're in the service of student learning here. That's just seems to be, it's cultural, which I appreciate. It's a value that everybody can easily reel off. But more to the point, it's just in the DNA of people who are attracted to working in a community college and who find that it's a place they want to stay in. And that's pretty powerful because it's an easy thing to rally around as well. You know, other ideas and campaigns are maybe hard to get everybody on board with, but student success is an easy thing for everybody to say, yeah, I get that, and count me in. So that's a pretty powerful thing. I think if I was to come up with a second, it's engaged. And this one somewhat surprised me, I'll be honest. You remember 3 years ago, we did a lot of surveys of how you were feeling about your work. And the thing that came back is that we were approximately 70% engaged as it's defined by consulting agencies who look at such things. And what was amazing about that is that the normal in most work environments is under 50%. Now that under 50% thing is really discouraging from a leadership perspective, which implies in those agencies, more than half your workers are showing up not really thrilled with what they do or not really kind of connected with it, and they're kind of watching the clock and looking forward to getting done. And, you know, I've seen those agencies, I've worked in some of them, you don't want to be in front of the door at 5 o'clock, you'll get mowed over. But here at 70%, we have our gripes and our dissatisfactions like any group of people do. But for the most part, what was reported back in that process was that our employees are engaged with the work they do. They connect with the mission. They understand what we do for our community and for our students, and that they stay connected with that, which by definition is an engaged employee. So really appreciative of you for being the exception and not the rule.
Great. And as we wrap up, you know, today you've talked about the challenges of the enrollment, some of the different financial things going on, legislative things, the changing workplace, and then the whole transition with the new chancellor. So that's a lot of different issues and stress swirling around for all of the different staff at CCS. What kind of advice do you have to everyone at CCS as we navigate all these changes? And if you'd share that with us and have that be kind of your wrap up for the town hall.
Yeah, well, I can tell you what works for me, and that's always having purpose in mind. You know, daily to kind of connect again with why it is that you do this and why it matters and why it's important. I often envy our instructors for a lot of reasons, but one is that they have that daily interaction with purpose. They get to see it as a student, as when the lights go on for a student and they're learning, or that they're overcoming, or that they're feeling successful. Some of us are more removed from that, and I think you have to find your way to connect to it. And sometimes it's helping that instructor connect with it on a daily basis. I also encourage folks, if they're ever feeling a little disconnected, to go attend a graduation. Doesn't matter which one, just pick one. I have my favorites, but just go and take it in. And it's easy. That'll give you a year boost pretty easily. And then I think, you know, just maintaining a good work-life balance, remembering that some of the best advice I ever got was early in my career from a guy. I was his budget analyst, and I had hard news to deliver. We were going to cut his budget by 10%. And he was a very worldly, you know, very experienced administrator, public administrator. He said, Greg, I don't control how much money you'll give me. I'll tell you what it takes me to provide 100% of the services I'm asked to provide. And if you give me 90% of the funding, then I guarantee you 90% of those services. And it was a wonderful way to say, I can control what I can control. The rest of it I'm going to let go and not worry about. And I think that is really helpful on a daily basis to keep in mind as well.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming to the town hall and thank the folks online who have taken part as well. There'll be information shared on the inside, and there'll also be a link to a recording of this. So if you know of people who missed it, who still would like to hear the information, we'll be sharing that out on the inside. And for those of you reluctant on the inside readers, it comes out every Monday in your email, and it's packed with lots of information. So I hope that you'll keep track of that. We'll have another town hall with Greg during spring quarter. That one will be over at Spokane Falls Community College, and we'll be sure to let you know about that. And so I just ask you all to join me in giving Greg our appreciation for his time today.
Thank you.